It was my inaugural term at college. I had recently completed the process of putting all my belongings into my assigned space, and my relatives had just departed. Later that day, my flatmate eventually turned up, and from the outset I recognized this individual as the most socially awkward person I had ever encountered. I introduced myself as Ben, extending my hand for a customary greeting. He paused, looked down at my limb as if initially bewildered, then let out a nervous laugh and said, "Oh," offering an almost lifeless handshake in return. I had to prompt him for his designation, as he didn't even share it when we shook hands. He was named Alex. I attempted to engage in light conversation, but he merely responded to my queries with brief yes or no answers, punctuated by occasional clumsy chuckles or smiles. Within moments, we were both simply seated on our respective bunks, engrossed in our electronic devices, not speaking to each other. I felt frustrated and contemplated requesting reassignment with a different flatmate. Anyone, I mused, would be an improvement over Alex. Alex struck me as merely an exceptionally awkward individual, but I soon discovered there was much more to him than that. I connected with some of the other residents on my corridor, and they seemed like decent people, which was a positive development. I returned to my lodging after exploring the campus area on that initial evening, only to find Alex positioned exactly as he had been when I left. I offered a casual greeting. "How's it going, Alex?" And he gave no reply, which didn't particularly surprise me. It was approaching 9:20 p.m. and I had no further activities planned, so I switched off the light fixture on my side of the room and prepared for rest. However, I didn't manage to fall asleep anytime soon. Alex remained active on his computer until nearly 3:30 in the morning. When he finally closed his device, I drifted off quite quickly, but my rest was interrupted within the hour. The curtains covering our window had been opened, and the lunar glow now filtering into the room made everything visible, including Alex seated on the edge of his bunk, gazing in my direction. I sat upright, rubbed my eyes, and inquired, "Alex, what in the world are you doing?" He softly murmured, "Apologies," and then lay down. The following morning I awoke to find Alex had already risen. It felt as though this might have been the first time he had left the room since arriving. It was a Saturday, the initial Saturday of the academic year, which meant welcoming events and various campus festivities. During the orientation proceedings, as my group passed by the university grounds, I overheard a couple of students ahead of me commenting, "What's that young person doing in there?" I saw who they were referring to. It was Alex, literally positioned on the soil behind a cluster of plants, gently caressing the rough exterior of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, otherwise I'm certain she would have commented. I simply walked past without saying anything initially, eventually mentioning to the two students I overheard that he was my flatmate, as a means to strike up a conversation and perhaps forge some connections. They expressed sympathy towards me. None of us were really sure if it was appropriate to react with amusement or not, but we did share a laugh. I became friends with those two individuals, and we made plans to spend time together that evening. I also learned upon returning to my lodging that the university had arranged for a new flatmate for me. It seemed things were rapidly improving. I left the room that night to meet up with the two companions I had just made, and when I returned, Alex was occupying the desk seat facing the entry door. I said, "Hey, how's it going?" He replied, "Fine," in a very straightforward manner. I took a seat on my bunk and opened my laptop only to realize I had neglected to lock it. I also noticed that all of my electronic messages had been opened, messages I was quite sure I hadn't even read, and a number of my file directories had been accessed. Alex must have browsed through my machine. When I asked him directly if he had done so, he responded with a loud, immediate negative, barely half a second after I had finished my question. I could discern his dishonesty clearly. This unsettling individual had been literally going through my computer while I was out. I was certain he had done it, but I opted not to push the issue further. I was ready to prepare for rest, so as I reached into my bed to search for my sleepwear, I felt as though my garments had also been rearranged. Knowing I would be relocating permanently by tomorrow, I chose not to make any comment. I was startled awake in the dead of night by the sound of a fastening slide. I sat upright and saw Alex on the floor rummaging through my satchel. I activated the light fixture this time, confronting him about it. He feigned ignorance, stating, "I suspect you've mistakenly taken my dental brush." It was the closest thing to cleverness he had exhibited up to that point. Still, I knew he was lying, and I sensed something was profoundly wrong with him, so I refrained from any physical reaction. The following day, I met my new flatmate in the same structure, and the process went smoothly. Sunday evening, after having a pleasant chat with my new flatmate, who wasn't an overly social individual but was significantly more normal than Alex, we both extinguished our lights and prepared for sleep. For the third consecutive night, I was awakened at some strange hour by an odd sound. It was a peculiar soft tapping noise. It wasn't consistent, but I'd hear it at least a couple of times every half-minute. I rose from bed hoping to find a harmless explanation like a heavy item exerting pressure on a weak floorboard or even a small rodent. But as I surveyed the chamber, I realized the sound was actually originating from beyond the entryway. The low light in the shared area was always on, so when I peered through the viewing port, I was able to see the crown of the person standing on the other side of our door. They were looking downwards, so I couldn't see their face, but now that I was paying closer attention, I understood that the tiny tapping noises were actually coming from the latch mechanism. I was convinced the individual was attempting to gain entry. I contacted the number for the campus security department, and they appeared within approximately 5 minutes in the shared area, and only then did I feel it was safe to open the door. I found the officers holding Alex in restraints. I had strongly suspected it was him. I explained the entire situation to them, that he was my previous flatmate who had been rummaging through my belongings, which caused me to relocate lodgings only to find him now attempting to force entry into my new quarters. They apprehended him. I am uncertain what became of him after that, but I never encountered him again. He likely faced either temporary removal for the term or permanent dismissal. I completed the remainder of my college tenure like any other student. However, the unsettling experience I had with Alex occasionally surfaces in my thoughts. I studied at a college in upstate New York for 2 years. I quickly forged a large circle of companions there, and we would socialize weekly. One particular weekend, a Friday night in autumn, when my group didn't have any major plans together, I and two other close pals decided to spend time in the collegiate woodlands near the water body. There was this small open space on the distant side of the lake that was convenient for bonfires, as it was so secluded from the view of the university buildings or campus security. Young people would sometimes, though not frequently, gather here for marijuana, alcohol, and essentially various other substances. It was a relatively unknown location on campus by most, and we appreciated that aspect of it. Tonight we just carried in a quantity of beverages, started a blaze, and spent time engaged in what we referred to at the time as a guy talk. As the evening wore on, time seemed to accelerate as the drink began to take hold. Eventually it reached a point where we were all convulsing with laughter so hard that one of my two friends was on the ground rolling amongst the fallen foliage. That was when my other friend abruptly ceased amusement and uttered, "Quiet." We all became attentive and listened, hearing the rustling of vegetation underfoot in the distance. We discarded our containers into the water as we were all below the legal drinking age, and it wasn't unheard of for university security to conduct patrols through the woods on weekends specifically to apprehend individuals engaged in illicit substance use. We stashed the rest of the beverages into a pack. I was slightly inebriated, so my level of suspicion was elevated beyond the norm. That was probably the case for all of us. The fire made us visible to anyone passing through the forest, but the thing is, this spot was so obscure and remote from campus that it was rare to encounter anyone that deep in the woodlands. It sounded like a single individual approaching in the distance. The sound of a tree limb breaking not too far away startled all of us. None of us were really the assertive types from our group, so we lacked that one person who would possess the confidence to stand up and call out to whoever was out there. Instead, we all just remained silent, urging silence upon each other. We heard what seemed to be someone or something traversing a circular path around our small fire pit. It genuinely began to resemble a scene from a horror film because these sounds in the near distance, like snapping tree branches and rustling leaves on the ground, kept echoing towards our location. We shared a laugh about it at first, but I personally soon became quite unnerved by the potential identity of the presence. Suddenly, a heavy impact sound occurred, causing all three of us to startle. Initially, I didn't understand, even though I saw what had caused the sound. It took me a few seconds to process the fact that a substantial piece of wood had been hurled directly into the center of our fire. One of my two friends bolted while my other friend and I remained seated, a mix of amusement and apprehension, feeling as though we didn't yet know if this was some kind of joke. Then my friend emitted a cry of discomfort as he was struck in the facial area by another branch. I seized the pack, assisted my injured friend, and we sprinted back towards our residential building. When we reached the paved path separating the forest from our lodgings, we paused to regain our breath. But the sound of footsteps closing in proved that whoever was out there was following us. We resumed running back towards the lodging, and when we arrived back at our corridor, we found our other friend already in his room. We looked out of his window down into the forest area. Someone was walking back and forth near the tree line, and every time a vehicle drove by, they would retreat into the undergrowth. Eventually, the individual vanished into the woods permanently, never to be seen again by our group. We resumed our beverage consumption session in the room, and within approximately 10 minutes, we were all laughing about it. It wasn't until the following morning that the true terror of the experience sunk in for all of us. We refrained from venturing back into the woods after nightfall subsequently. This takes place during the initial week of school, my first year at a university in a Midwest state. I was just starting to get comfortable with my flatmate. He was quite dedicated to the idea of joining a brotherhood, and the recruitment week was scheduled to begin the following week. But introductory parties were starting on Thursday of the first week. My flatmate didn't want to attend alone, as it would make it harder to meet people that way, so he wanted me to accompany him. I readily agreed to go with him, even though I had no interest in joining a brotherhood. I still intended to attend parties. After all, I was attending a school known for its social scene. My flatmate wanted to go to one brotherhood party on Thursday, and then gatherings at different brotherhood houses on Friday and Saturday. On this Thursday night, we were headed to perhaps one of the lowest-ranked brotherhoods. I'm fairly certain it was also an unofficial one, but his reasoning for attending was to have a fallback option in case the higher-ranked ones didn't extend him an invitation. The Brotherhood house was quite distant from campus, located in a much more run-down area downtown. We pulled up to a corner dwelling, and if it weren't for the blaring sound system and vehicles parked everywhere, we would never have pictured this house as a Brotherhood residence. It literally looked like they had settled for the first available structure. We knocked on the door, only to be immediately greeted by some short, stout individual in a light-colored garment holding a plastic cup. His shirt displayed perspiration marks near his underarms and central abdominal area. He told us to come right in. The party itself was situated in a horribly dimly lit space with probably 50 young men crammed into the main reception area. It was incredibly hot inside. To make matters worse, I think I saw perhaps 2 young women at the entire gathering, neither of whom were particularly appealing. I gave the party a decent 20 minutes, conversing with one heavier-set non-native speaker after another, all exuding socially inhibited vibes. Eventually, I motioned for my flatmate to prepare to depart, but a substantial cluster of individuals by the entry made us decide to wait a little longer to avoid the awkwardness of leaving prematurely. I continued to consume the inexpensive beers they were serving. I believe I downed 5 cups before I could even feel a slight effect. A large-framed individual approached me with a tiny vessel in his hand and handed it to me, smirking and saying, "That'll make you very intoxicated." I offered a forced laugh and thanked him, expecting him to move along, but he just observed me as if he were waiting for me to drink it. So I did. It was perhaps 2 shots worth of some kind of potent spirit. The individual then began making conversation with me. And every time I hinted that I was attempting to disengage, he would try to draw me further into this otherwise one-sided discussion. Things started to become quite hazy relatively soon. I recall feeling dizzy all of a sudden, and the room seemed to be getting darker. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in a dark chamber lying in a bed. I could hear the sound of music muffled behind closed portals, so I knew I was still within the Brotherhood house. It was a very dark room, however, I could still distinguish certain furnishings in the space and a small wardrobe door. Not much else, though. But even over the blaring music, I heard the sound of a plastic wrapper being crunched from within the wardrobe, as if someone had stepped on it by mistake. I ran out of that room and descended the stairs back to the overcrowded main reception area. I found my flatmate and urged him out the front entry past a group of individuals still standing in a circle right next to it. During the car ride back to campus, I told my flatmate I had been given something. He almost contacted the authorities, but I said it would be senseless and achieve nothing. My flatmate then asked me an awkward question. Had I been taken advantage of? I didn't feel any sort of discomfort, and my clothing was all still arranged the same way, so I assumed not. When I checked the time, I realized I'd only been unconscious for perhaps 10 minutes before waking up. Whatever the individual gave me must have been ineffective or something. Thank goodness. That was my college experience of attending an underground, unsophisticated Brotherhood gathering, and it remains my most frightening life experience. I had a private room my first semester of my second year. It was located at the extremity of the level, somewhat isolated from the other dwelling spaces, as it was in its own small section. You had to turn around a bend to even see the entrance. It was convenient because I would be able to still chat with companions on my corridor, invite people over to my space, and still maintain solitude when it was time to work on assignments or prepare for sleep. Several weeks into the term, while revising for a biology test, the quiet was broken by an audible disturbance. It took me a moment to identify it was a gentle series of raps upon the door. It was so subtle that I almost didn't even hear it. I called out, "You may enter," but the portal remained shut, so I arose to open it. No one was present. I walked around the bend to inspect the passageway. Still no one. Someone was obviously playing a trick on me. I returned to my bunk and continued studying, this time leaving the entrance ajar. No one reappeared. The following evening, a short while after extinguishing the light fixture in my chamber to prepare for rest, the tapping on the door recommenced, only this time it was noticeably louder, more of a rapping sound. I called out, "Who is there?" And again the sound ceased and no one responded. I exited my bunk swiftly and opened the door to see my small private connecting passage was void of any people again. I ran the short distance from my door to the bend to peer down the main corridor of the level. Still no one. The next morning I inquired with some of the other residents in the lodging if they had been playing a trick on me. Everyone denied it. Their reactions seemed genuine. The following night I awoke after having been asleep for roughly 3 hours. Someone was knocking on my door again, this time more forceful than ever before. I had trouble deciding whether to open the door or not. This time, gathering some resolve, I quickly rose and opened the entrance. No one was there as anticipated. But this time, I broke into a full run down the brief connecting passage, and as I rounded the corner I glimpsed the retreating figure of somebody vanishing behind the distant bend on the opposite side of the hall. I ran as fast as I could along the hallway, and as I turned into the next corridor where I had seen the person moments ago, I noticed a door closing at the far end. It wasn't a room entrance. It was a lavatory. I felt ready to confront this individual, so I pushed the lavatory door open forcefully. The illumination was off. I switched on the light, anticipating finding someone hiding in there, but I didn't see anyone. My immediate thought was to check the 2 private compartments, which were both closed. I dropped to my hands and knees and peered beneath the 2 partitions. A pair of dark, substantial footwear were visible from underneath one of the compartment doors. I took a deep breath and pushed the compartment door open. I was bewildered. There were the boots sitting on the floor, but no one was wearing them. And then I heard an eerie chuckle. Not feminine or juvenile, it was the kind of laughing that I could only associate with a very old, possibly unstable man. For some reason, my prior courage evaporated, and I became extremely frightened. Therefore, I sprinted back to my room and secured the entrance. I jumped back into my bunk and began messaging all my contacts. Naturally, everyone was asleep, though. The knocking occurred once more that night. I chose to ignore it. It persisted for about half a minute before whoever that person was finally stopped. I spoke with everyone on my level the following day. No one else had heard any sounds, and they all swore they were not playing a trick on me. Everybody seemed sincere. I remain uncertain why this person chose to target me or who they were. Based on the footwear and the laughter I heard, it seemed to be an older gentleman, and that detail is particularly unsettling.